The stars above Caliban had always burned with a quiet, cold dignity, as though they alone were eternal, while all below was destined to fall. Yet tonight, one of them was dying. A pale, swollen sun dimmed upon the black horizon, casting the great forests of Caliban in a ghostly pallor. The wind howled through ruined keeps, their once proud towers crumbling into moss and dust. And from within those shadows, the voices of old knights seemed to stir, as if restless in their long forgotten graves. In the distance, thunder rolled, not of storms, but of engines. Great ships, black and monolithic, passed like silent omens across the void. The galaxy beyond was aflame with the Emperor's wars. But Caliban had always been different. It was a place apart, a world where shadows had weight and ancient oaths clung like cobwebs to the soul. And it is here, dear listener, that our story begins. We truly love and care for you, for it is no small thing to join us on a tale such as this, one of tragedy, betrayal, and the fall of the proud. Before we begin the journey in earnest, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, grab your coffee and let us begin. The Lion L. Johnson stood alone upon the walls of Uldaruk, the great fortress monastery of the Dark Angels. From this height, he could see the endless canopy of Caliban's forests stretching into the far horizon, broken only by jagged mountains that rose like the teeth of some long-buried beast. His golden mane caught the dimming light of the dying star, though his face was as cold and still as the stone beneath his boots. It was said the lion was born of the forest, found as a child amidst beasts and darkness, and it was in the forest's silence that his heart still dwelt. Yet there was no peace in him tonight. The Emperor's summons had been clear. The great crusade pressed ever onward, and the Dark Angels were needed to bring light to the uncompliant stars. But as the galaxy called, so too did Caliban whisper, and its whispers were troubled. Luther, his oldest companion, stood at his side. There had been a time when the two men were as one mind, brothers in every sense save blood. Yet now, there was distance. The lion felt it, though neither spoke of it. "You stare at the forests as though they accuse you," Luther said at last, his voice smooth, almost amused. "They do not accuse," the lion replied, eyes never leaving the horizon. "They remember." Luther's smile faded at that, though he said nothing more. There was tension here, something unspoken, something that had been growing like a sickness beneath the surface. The lion could feel it in the air, could see it in the eyes of those who walked the halls of Uldaruk. The Terran-born Astartes and the sons of Caliban no longer moved as one. The galaxy beyond promised endless war. The Emperor's dream demanded endless loyalty. Yet here, on this single, wild world, lay something more dangerous than any enemy the lion had faced: the shadow of division. That night, the lion walked alone through the ancient halls of the fortress. He passed the old banners of the Order, their cloth fraying with age, the symbols of knighthood dim in the torchlight. He remembered the vows they had sworn, the battles they had fought together, the blood spilled to make Caliban whole, and now he wondered if it had all been in vain. At the highest tower, he looked once more at the dying star. Its light was faint now, as though it too was surrendering to the darkness. A storm was coming. He could feel it, not of wind and rain, but of loyalty and blood. And though he was the lion, master of the First Legion, there was a strange weight in his heart, a foreboding he could not name. Below him, the forest stirred, and the winds carried the faintest of whispers. words he should not have been able to hear, yet which reached him all the same. The shadow returns. The brother divides. The doom begins. And in that moment, though the galaxy awaited his sword, the lion knew the greatest battle of his life would not be fought among the stars. It would be fought here, on the soil of Caliban, in the hearts of those he loved. The forests of Caliban had always been dark, but never silent. The air was alive with the calls of hidden beasts, the rustle of unseen wings, the eternal shifting of branches in the wind. Yet in the days that followed the lion's return from Aldoruk's walls, there was a deeper silence, one that no creature had made. It was the silence of men who watched each other with wary eyes. The Dark Angels had returned victorious from the Great Crusade's distant fronts, but victory had brought with it a new kind of tension. The Legion was not as it had once been. Half its warriors were sons of Caliban, knights raised in the shadow of its forests, bound by ancient honor. The other half were Terran-born Astartes, warriors of the Emperor's making, bred for war alone. And though they wore the same colors, their loyalty was split by something deeper than words. The lion had seen it in the mess halls, in the training yards, in the way old brothers stood apart from the new. What had once been subtle differences had hardened into quiet divisions. The cracks were there, and though no one dared name them, they grew each day. Luther moved among the Calibanite warriors with a practiced ease. His voice was warm, his hand on the shoulder steady, his smile quick to rise. He spoke to them of the Legion's glory, but also of Caliban itself, its forests, its people, its place in a galaxy that seemed ever further away from them. He spoke of loyalty, yes, but his loyalty was no longer a simple thing. And in whispered corners, he began to plant the smallest seeds. The Emperor's light is a great thing, Luther would say to a gathered circle of knights, his voice quiet, intimate. But what has it done for Caliban? What has it done for us? Are we more than tools in his wars? The men would shift uncomfortably, some nodding, some saying nothing, but the words stayed with them. The lion knew. Of course he knew. Luther's charm, his influence, it was as much a weapon as any blade. But the lion also remembered the man who had found him in the forests, the one who had first shown him the meaning of loyalty. To act against him now would be to wound something the lion had never wanted to wound. So he stayed silent. That silence, more than anything, was the first true fracture. One night, as a pale moon hung over the fortress, the lion walked the inner walls alone. His armor was unadorned, his cloak drawn against the cold. From a narrow balcony, he looked down into the courtyard where Calibanite knights trained in the torchlight. Their movements were precise, beautiful, a memory of a time before the Emperor, before the Crusade. And in the shadow of the courtyard, he saw Luther speaking softly to a small group. The lion could not hear the words, but he could see the faces of the men, rapt, intent, their eyes burning with something more than devotion. When Luther noticed the lion's gaze, he smiled as if nothing were amiss. But his eyes told another story. Later, in the Hall of Banners, the two men met. "You move among the men, often," the lion said, his voice calm, measured. "I have always moved among them," Luther replied. "It is what I have always done. They are my brothers as much as yours." "They are soldiers of the Emperor," the lion answered, his tone sharpening. "Not a court to be swayed." Luther's smile faded, replaced by something cooler. And yet, it was not the Emperor who bled beside them in the forests. It was not terror that made them who they are. It was Caliban. Do you forget that? There was silence then. silence that felt like a blade drawn but not yet swung. The lion turned away, unwilling or perhaps unable to answer. And in that moment, Luther knew that the lion's silence was not strength, it was hesitation, and hesitation could be shaped. In the weeks that followed, small incidents began to ripple through the Legion. A Terran sergeant found himself mysteriously isolated during a patrol. A Calibanite captain hesitated to follow a direct order from a Terran officer. Nothing outright, nothing treasonous. But the cracks widened. At night, the lion walked the halls alone, feeling the weight of every stone above him. Alderuk had once been the seat of unity, of brotherhood. Now it felt like the walls themselves held their breath. And somewhere deep within the fortress, in a chamber lit only by candlelight, Luther met with a group of knights. Their words were quiet, almost reverent. "It begins," one of them whispered. Above the fortress, the pale moon drifted behind black clouds, and the wind carried no sound at all. The summons came in silence, but its weight was deafening. High above Caliban, the void was filled with the shadow of the invincible reason, its vast silhouette blotting out the pale moonlight as it descended into orbit. The Emperor's command had reached the lion. A new campaign awaited. Worlds yet unbent to his will burned across the stars, and the First Legion was needed to bring them into the fold. For days, the fortress of Alderuk was alive with the sounds of departure. Engines roared as thunderhawks ferried warriors to orbiting ships. The clang of armor being fitted echoed through the halls, and the old banners of the Legion were taken down from their stands, their fabrics stirring for perhaps the last time in the halls of Caliban. The lion walked the fortress one last time before departure. Every corridor was heavy with memory. The stone stairs worn by centuries of footsteps, the training yards scarred by countless duels. He passed knights of both Caliban and Terra, each saluting, each masking their thoughts. But the silence between them was deeper than ever. It was in the grand hall that Luther approached him. "Another war," Luther said quietly, his voice carrying both pride and something unspoken. "The Emperor's wars are endless," the lion replied, his eyes fixed ahead. Luther studied him for a moment, then added, "And Caliban remains, as it is. Is it wise to leave it now, brother? There are matters here still unresolved." The lion turned then, his gaze like ice. "You will resolve them." It was both an order and a test, though neither man said as much. Luther bowed his head, but in his eyes burned something the lion could not name, or perhaps would not name. The day of departure came. The great fleet rose from Caliban's skies, engines screaming as they broke through the clouds. On the walls of Alderuk, Luther stood with a host of knights, watching as the lion's ship climbed toward the stars. His cloak was dark in the wind, his expression unreadable. Beyond the atmosphere, the void opened like an endless sea. The lion stood upon the bridge of the invincible reason, its command deck lit by the cold glow of 1,000 monitors. Star maps spread out before him, their constellations marked with worlds yet to be claimed. His duty was clear. And yet, as the fleet prepared to translate into the warp, a faint voice came through the astropathic channels. It was weak, distant, broken by static, but the words cut through the noise like a blade. "Your home will turn against you." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but the lion said nothing. His face was calm, his mind unmoved. Yet deep within, the words echoed. The fleet slipped into the immaterium, the fabric of reality tearing open in a violent flash of light. The stars vanished, replaced by the swirling madness of the warp. Great shapes moved beyond the veil. vast, half-seen silhouettes that were older than any star. On the edge of his vision, the lion thought he saw a form in the storm, a pale figure, cloaked in shadows, its mouth moving though no sound reached him. Beware the brother who waits in silence. The vision vanished. The warp howled on. Far behind him, Caliban turned slowly in the void, its green forests hidden beneath rolling clouds. And in those forests, under the watchful eyes of knights who now answered to Luther, something old began to stir. The lion's war lay far ahead, across 1,000 light years. But his true war, the one that would break him, waited at home. Caliban was changing. The forests had always been vast, wild, and dangerous, but now there was an unease within them. The trees grew darker, their canopies thick with shadow, and the air itself seemed heavier. The beasts that once roamed freely withdrew deeper into the woods, as though driven back by something unseen. Above the forests, the fortress of Alderuk remained a symbol of order, but inside its walls, something else was taking root. Luther, left in command by the lion, walked the corridors as a man reborn. His presence was constant, his voice ever steady, his manner reassuring to those who served beneath him. But beneath the calm, a quiet transformation had begun. He spoke more often of Caliban's glory, its knights, its ancient ways, its future. And though he never openly defied the emperor, his words began to shift subtly, turning loyalty inward, toward the world itself. At first, it was only words. Then it became action. The training of Calibanite knights intensified. New weapons were forged in the hidden forges beneath the fortress. Old keeps, once abandoned to the forests, were restored and fortified. Ships were outfitted not for crusade duty, but for defense of the homeworld. When questioned by the Terran-born captains still stationed on Caliban, Luther's answers were smooth, reasonable. "The galaxy is dangerous," he would say. "Should the Emperor call, we will be ready. But if others should come, Caliban will stand." Yet the Terran-born officers grew uneasy, and more than once a Terran voice vanished from the halls of Alderuk. In the deep forests, far from the fortress, Luther's influence spread even further. Small gatherings of knights began to form, speaking openly of Caliban's future apart from the Imperium. Luther himself would sometimes attend, his words careful, his promises never explicit, but always enough to ignite a spark. "You have served the Emperor well," he would say. "But ask yourself, has the Emperor served you? Has terror given Caliban more than it has taken?" The men would murmur in reply. Some would nod. And each night, a little more loyalty shifted from the Imperium to the man who stood before them. In the archives of Alderuk, Luther began to study the forbidden texts once sealed away by the lion. Books of old Calibanite lore, grimoires of strange knowledge. At first, it was for understanding. At least, that is what he told himself. But the words within spoke of powers long hidden, of truths buried in the deep places of the world. And in those same days, the first whispers began. Servants moving through the lower halls swore they heard voices in the dark calling their names. Warriors spoke of strange dreams, visions of black forests under red skies, of a great rift in the heavens. When news of this reached Luther, he dismissed it as nonsense, but in private his thoughts lingered on the dreams. One evening, as the pale moon hung low over the fortress, Luther stood in the great hall, alone. His gaze swept over the banners of the dark angels, lit by the flickering torches, and he thought of the lion far away among the stars. "You were always the stronger," he murmured to the empty hall. but perhaps strength is not what Caliban needs now. The words hung in the silence like a promise. Far below, in the forests, a secret forge roared to life. Weapons unlike any made for the Emperor were taking shape, and in the warp, faint but growing stronger, a shadow turned its gaze toward Caliban. The void broke open above Caliban in a storm of light. From the blackness between the stars, the fleet of the First Legion emerged, battered by a dozen campaigns. Their hulls bore the scars of war, scorch marks from alien weapons, gouges from orbital bombardments, and the sigils of 100 conquered worlds. At their head, the invincible Reason descended like a shadow over the moonlit forests of Caliban. The lion had returned. From the walls of Uldaruk, the fortress watched. Calibanite knights and Terran-born veterans lined the battlements, their armor immaculate, their banners snapping in the wind. And at the center, robed in the deep green of the First Legion, Luther stood waiting. When the Thunderhawk settled on the landing platform, the air was thick with tension. The ramp descended, and the lion stepped forward. His golden hair caught the pale light of Caliban's moons, but his face was unreadable. His eyes swept over the assembled warriors like a cold tide. Luther stepped forward to greet him, his smile warm, his voice steady. "My lord returns to his home," Luther said. The lion's gaze lingered on him for a long moment before he replied, "My home has changed." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that could not be mistaken. In the days that followed, the lion walked the halls of Uldaruk. He saw the subtle changes that time and Luther's hand had wrought. The restored keeps, the increased fortifications, the quiet confidence in the eyes of the Calibanite knights. On the surface, it was discipline, but beneath, there was something else. He spoke to Terran-born officers, and their reports were careful, their words chosen. They spoke of Luther's efficiency, his dedication to Caliban, his discipline over the men. But there were hesitations in their voices, pauses that said more than words could. In the great hall, the lion summoned Luther. "You have strengthened Caliban," the lion said. "Its defenses are greater than when I left. The men are sharper, the keeps restored. Yet, I sense something in them I did not before." Luther met his gaze evenly. "They are loyal, my lord, loyal to the Legion, loyal to you." The lion studied him in silence, his expression unreadable. "Loyalty," he said at last, "is a word often spoken, but less often tested." Luther's smile did not falter, but his eyes darkened just slightly. In the weeks that followed, the lion inspected the planet more closely. He walked through the rebuilt keeps, spoke to knights who had once been young initiates in the forests. Their discipline was flawless. Their respect was clear. But in their voices, there was a pride that seemed inward. Caliban had been reforged in his absence, not just in stone and steel, but in spirit. And then there were the weapons. In the lower forges, the lion found arms crafted with exquisite skill. Blades and bolters, yes, but also heavier weaponry, the kind not made for ceremonial defense, but for sustained war. When questioned, the master of the forge bowed deeply. "The galaxy is dangerous, my lord. We are prepared." The lion said nothing, but that night, from the highest tower, he looked out over the dark forests of Caliban. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying voices only he seemed to hear. Luther joined him there, as he had in years past. "The forests remain unchanged," Luther said softly, "even after all the galaxy's wars." The lion's gaze did not move from the horizon. "Number, they have changed. Everything has." their silence stretched into the night, the bond between them intact in form, yet fraying at its edges. Beneath them, the forests shifted in the wind, and far away, the forges roared on. The days on Caliban turned heavier. The skies that once rolled with silver clouds now hung dark, weighed down by an invisible tension. The forests grew stiller, their silence broken only by the whisper of wind in the leaves. It was as though the world itself felt the pressure building, an invisible storm drawing near. Within Alderuk, the lion sensed it as surely as he sensed the pull of the warp. The bonds that held the legion together were fraying, the old harmony replaced by subtle hesitations. Orders were followed, but not always with the immediacy he expected. There were glances, quiet pauses, and silences that told him more than words. One evening, a Terran-born captain named Orlan brought word to the lion in private. His voice was quiet, as though even the walls might be listening. "My lord," Orlan said, bowing low, "there are gatherings, meetings in the lower halls, Calibanite knights only. They speak of honor, of Caliban's pride." The lion's gaze hardened, and Luther, the captain, hesitated. "He is present, always present." The lion dismissed him with a nod, his face unreadable. But when Orlan's footsteps faded, the lion stood alone in the great chamber for a long while, his hand resting on the pommel of his blade. That night, Luther joined him on the high balcony overlooking the dark forests. The two men stood side by side, their silence deeper than any conversation. "You have been restless, my lord," Luther said at last, his voice low. "There is unrest in the legion," the lion replied. "I can feel it." Luther's smile was faint, almost sorrowful. "The men have been through much. They have fought the Emperor's wars, bled on 100 worlds. Is it so strange they think also of home?" The lion turned his head then, his eyes piercing. "They think of Caliban first, not of the Emperor. And why should they not?" Luther's voice sharpened just slightly. "The Emperor has his crusade, but who will guard this world if we are gone? Who will care for its people, for the forests, for the sons who will never see terror?" The silence that followed was long, broken only by the wind. "You tread dangerous ground, old friend," the lion said at last. Luther inclined his head slightly. "Perhaps, but I tread it for Caliban." In the days that followed, incidents began to occur. Small at first, an order delayed here, a Terran sergeant finding himself without support during a routine exercise, a patrol returning, missing a man with no explanation. The lion kept his silence, watching, weighing. His instincts told him that action now could shatter the legion outright, but every day that passed brought the storm closer. Then came the message. A lone loyalist from the outer keeps rode hard for Alderuk. His armor was scorched, his voice raw from exhaustion. He fell to one knee before the lion. "My lord," he gasped, "the First Legion. It is breaking." Before the lion could speak, the knight collapsed at his feet, his lifeblood staining the stone. The lion's gaze lifted to the horizon, where thunder rolled in the distance. He did not know if the sound was from storm or war. Either way, the storm was coming. The winds that swept across Caliban that season carried no scent of rain, no promise of renewal. They were dry and hollow, as if the very air had been stripped of life. The forest stood in uneasy silence. Even the great beasts that lurked within the ancient woods had vanished into their shadowed depths. The lion felt the change in every step he took through the halls of Alderuk. The fortress was not quieter. Its sounds were the same as ever. The ring of steel, the bark of commands, the measured tread of boots. Yet the harmony beneath those sounds was gone. The rhythm had changed. He had seen battlefields where loyalty held armies together in the face of annihilation. He had seen what happened when that loyalty cracked. It began with whispers. Reports reached the Lion from the outer keeps. Calibanite knights were holding councils of their own, no longer waiting for orders from Terran officers. Patrols were sent out without proper sanction. Supplies, intended for the crusade, were quietly redirected to fortify Caliban's defenses. Each time the Lion confronted Luther, his old companion's voice was calm, measured. "The knights are loyal," Luther would say. "They act for the good of Caliban. The Terrans see insult in every shadow." But the Lion had begun to see the shadows for himself. He called a private council one night in the high war room. Only the most trusted Terran-born captains were present. The chamber was lit only by the pale glow of the holomap, the surface of Caliban flickering in green light. "There is division in the Legion," the Lion said, his voice low but hard as stone. "It grows each day. This cannot continue." Captain Orland stepped forward. "My lord, with respect, it may be too late. There are keeps loyal to Luther, not to you. They speak of Caliban's destiny beyond the Imperium." The Lion's jaw tightened. Destiny belongs to the Emperor. Even as he spoke the words, he knew the truth. Destiny, once spoken aloud, could not be easily reclaimed. Days later, a Calibanite captain openly refused a Terran officer's order during a training exercise. The confrontation ended without blood, but the defiance rippled through the Legion like a crack through glass. The Lion summoned Luther to the Grand Hall. "You know of this incident," the Lion said, his voice cold. "I do," Luther answered. His tone was calm, almost weary. "And you defend it?" "I defend their loyalty to Caliban," Luther said. "You left this world in my care. I have done what was necessary to keep it strong. Stronger, perhaps, than when you left it." There was a silence then, heavy and sharp. "You speak as though strength is not found in unity," the Lion said. "Unity?" Luther's voice hardened. "Unity with whom?" "Terror. With men who do not know this world, who do not care for its people. The Emperor wages his war across the stars, but here we build something real. You cannot see it because you are never here." The Lion's eyes burned, but he did not draw his sword. There was no battle to win with steel tonight. And yet, as Luther turned to leave, the Lion felt the old bond between them stretch thinner than it had ever been. That night, in the dark forests beyond Alderuk, a council gathered in secret. They spoke in low voices of oaths, of loyalty, of what Caliban could be if freed from the weight of distant terror. And above them, the moon slipped behind dark clouds, hiding its pale face. The air over Caliban grew heavier with each passing day. The skies hung low, a blanket of grey pressing down on the forests, as though the world itself waited for a blow it knew must fall. The fortress of Alderuk, once a beacon of unity, now felt like a blade drawn halfway from its scabbard, silent but ready to strike. The Lion could feel it. Every step through the halls carried with it the faint echo of dissonance. Calibanite knights bowed to him, their gestures perfectly measured, but their eyes were colder. Terran-born warriors saluted with precision, but their gazes held suspicion, even fear. And in the center of it all, Luther moved like a shadow in plain sight. He stood before the assembled knights more often now, his voice calm, his words carefully chosen. He spoke of the Emperor's vision, but also of Caliban's place in it. A place that sounded less like servitude and more like sovereignty. The Lion confronted him again in the grand hall, the two men standing beneath the great banners of the Dark Angels. "You speak of the Emperor's dream." the lion said, his voice low but edged with steel. And yet you shape it in your own image. Luther met his gaze without flinching. I shape nothing. I remind these men of what they are, of where they came from. Is it wrong to remember? It is wrong to forget the vows we swore, the lion replied. His voice echoed through the hall, though neither man raised it. Luther's smile was faint, but there was no warmth in it. Perhaps vows mean less to those who are never here to keep them. That night, a Terran supply convoy bound for orbit was intercepted by Calibanite forces. Officially, the supplies were requisitioned for planetary defense. In truth, the act was a quiet declaration. Caliban would serve its own needs first. The lion summoned his captains in secret. The line is nearly crossed, he said. Another act of open defiance, and this legion will break. Captain Orland stepped forward, his voice tense. My lord, it is already broken. There are keeps that no longer answer your summons. There are halls where your name is not spoken with honor. The lion dismissed the council, his thoughts heavy. The next day, as he walked the upper walls, he saw the signs for himself. Knights loyal to Luther trained separately from the Terran-born. The glances exchanged between the two groups were not the wary respect of comrades. They were the sharp, calculating looks of rivals. And then the first blood was drawn. A Terran sergeant was found dead in the lower barracks. Officially, it was said to be the result of an accident during weapons practice. Unofficially, no one believed it. The fortress grew quieter after that, but it was the kind of quiet that comes before lightning strikes. The lion stood that night in the tower overlooking the forests. The wind was heavy, the clouds thick with storm. Somewhere below, the forges roared on, shaping weapons he had not ordered. Luther joined him there, his cloak stirring in the wind. You feel it, too, Luther said. Yes, the lion replied. His voice was calm, but in his chest burned a storm. Neither man spoke further. There was nothing left to say that could delay what was coming. Far below, in the dark forests, fires burned. The breaking of the First Legion was not marked by a single battle, nor by the clash of blades in the open courtyard. It began in silence, in the spaces between words, in the glances that lingered too long. Caliban was tense as a drawn bow. The keeps in the outer forests no longer answered the lion's summons. Entire garrisons fell quiet, their banners still flying, but their loyalty shifting almost imperceptibly toward another center of gravity. Luther. In Alderuk, the halls were filled with a brittle calm. Calibanite knights drilled as they always had, but their movements felt sharper, less like unity and more like preparation. Terran-born Astartes still performed their duties, but they kept to themselves, their armor polished and their bolters cleaned as though expecting them to be needed soon, not in the Emperor's crusade, but here at home. The lion could feel it like a pressure in his chest. He summoned Luther to the High Council chamber, the banners of the First Legion fluttering faintly in the still air. The Legion cannot stand divided, the lion said. Your words have weight. You could still call them back. Luther stood at the far end of the table, his expression calm, his voice quiet. They are not divided. They are united in loyalty to Caliban, to you. To me? The lion's tone sharpened, or to the vision you have given them in my absence. Luther did not answer. There was a long silence between them. It was not the silence of hesitation this time. It was the silence of two paths diverging. That night, a patrol of Terran-born Astartes vanished in the forests. When the search parties returned, they brought back nothing but fragments of armor and a single torn banner. No enemy was found. No beast claimed the blame. Whispers ran through the fortress like wildfire. The lion ordered a formal investigation, but his commands met delays. Reports came late, incomplete, their details clouded. In some cases, they did not arrive at all. The Terran-born began to keep to the upper halls, posting guards at every approach. The Calibanites tightened their formations, their armor marked with subtle symbols that the lion had not sanctioned. The fortress, once a single heart, now beat in two rhythms. It was during a night patrol on the upper walls that the lion finally saw what he had long feared. Across the courtyard, in the torchlight, a company of Calibanite knights drilled, not in the patterns of the Legion, but in a style older, heavier, rooted in the traditions of Caliban's knightly orders. They moved as though the Imperium did not exist. The lion descended to the courtyard, his cloak sweeping the stone. The knights froze at his arrival, their weapons still in hand. "Who ordered this?" the lion demanded. The captain stepped forward. "Lord Luther approved it, my lord." The lion's voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. "Lord Luther is not the Primarch of the First Legion." The knights bowed, but their eyes did not yield. The lion returned to the high tower, his thoughts a storm. He looked out over the dark forests of Caliban, lit faintly by the fires of distant keeps. Somewhere below, Luther moved among his followers, calm, confident, untouchable. The fracture had come. It had not been declared, not yet, but it was real, and it was growing. The night was long, and the moon hid behind the clouds. The halls of Alderuk were colder now, not in stone or air. The fortress still burned with torchlight, the forges still roared deep within its heart, but in spirit. The warmth of brotherhood that had once bound the First Legion was gone. What remained was a formal, brittle courtesy, and beneath it, the grinding of two blades drawn slowly toward one another. The lion had ordered greater discipline. Drills were doubled, the chain of command tightened. Every order was given with precision and followed with outward obedience. Yet he knew that obedience in form was not the same as loyalty in heart. In the lower halls, away from the lion's watchful gaze, another kind of gathering began. Knights loyal to Luther met in quiet chambers, their voices low, their words deliberate. They spoke of Caliban's place in the galaxy, of the Emperor's distant wars, of the cost the First Legion had borne. They spoke of the lion, too, always with respect, but never without the faintest shadow of doubt. It was in one such gathering that Luther himself appeared. His presence was not announced. He stepped into the circle like a man among equals, his voice warm, his manner calm. "You have served the Legion well," he told them. "You have fought the Emperor's wars. You have bled for worlds you will never see again. But I ask you, who has fought for you? Who has bled for Caliban?" There was silence. In that silence, oaths were reforged, not spoken aloud, not formalized in blood, but bound in thought and loyalty. The lion sensed it, though he could not see it. One evening, he stood at the great window of the high tower, looking out over the forests. The pale moonlight touched the canopy, turning the trees into a sea of silver and black. He felt the wind on his face, cold and unchanging. Captain Orlan approached quietly, bowing. "My lord," he said, "there are keeps that no longer answer the muster calls. Their banners still hang, but their oaths, they are not to you." The lion did not turn. "And to whom are they sworn?" Orlan hesitated. "To Caliban, to Luther." The lion's hand tightened on the hilt of his blade. That night, the lion summoned Luther to the High Council chamber. They stood alone, the banners of the First Legion stirring faintly above them. "You bind the men to yourself," the lion said. His voice was calm, but beneath it was a weight that could shatter stone. "I bind them to Caliban," Luther replied, "as I always have." "You bind them away from the Emperor," the lion countered. Luther's gaze was steady. "Perhaps the Emperor binds them away from Caliban." The silence that followed was long, deep, and heavy with unspoken truths. Neither man drew a weapon. Neither man raised his voice. Yet the air in that chamber was as charged as any battlefield. When Luther left, the lion remained alone, his gaze fixed on the dark forests beyond the fortress walls. In the shadows of those forests, oaths had been sworn. They were not written, not carved in stone, but the rebellion did not come with a cry of defiance. It came in silence. The keeps of Caliban, one by one, ceased their open communications with Alderuk. Messages sent from the lion's captains received only curt replies, polite, deferential, but empty of obedience. Muster calls went unanswered. Supplies bound for the fleet were quietly delayed, rerouted to fortifications deep in the forests. The lion felt it more keenly than any other. It was not the rebellion of an enemy shouting from the walls. It was the rebellion of brothers stepping back from the circle, leaving a void where loyalty had once been. Reports from the Terran-born captains confirmed what he already knew. Luther's influence was now the heart that many keeps beat to. Luther himself remained calm, courteous, present. He walked the halls of Alderuk as though nothing had changed. His voice was smooth when he spoke to the lion, his words careful. "I have heard the keeps are restless," Luther said one evening, as they walked the high walls. "They are beyond restless," the lion replied. His eyes scanned the distant forests, where faint lights marked the outer garrisons. "They are silent, and silence, old friend, is not loyalty. It is preparation." Luther smiled faintly, almost sadly. Perhaps they prepare to defend what is theirs. The lion turned to him, his gaze unflinching. "And what is theirs belongs to the Emperor." Luther said nothing more. In the days that followed, the silence deepened. The outer forests grew darker. Patrols sent to the border keeps failed to return. The Terran-born within Alderuk began to move in pairs, wary of being isolated. At night, the lion walked the fortress alone. He could feel the shift in the air, the same sense he had felt before a great battle, when two armies faced one another in the mist and waited for the horn to sound. One evening, from the high balcony, he saw it. Far to the west, along the edge of the forest, fires burned, not the wild fires of the woods, but the steady, controlled burn of forges. The keeps there were working through the night. In the morning, Captain Orlan brought word. His face was grim. "My lord, the western keeps are producing weapons. Not for the Legion. They bear no mark of the Imperium." The lion dismissed him with a nod. That night, he stood alone in the grand hall beneath the banners of the First Legion. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade. The silence in the hall was deep, almost heavy. The silent rebellion was no longer a shadow. It was a wall. And walls, the lion knew, were made to be broken. They were strong enough to break the First Legion. The storm broke at last, not in open declaration, but in fire. It began in the deep forests, far from Alderuk, where the western keeps had fallen into silence. The lion had sent scouts, Terran-born, swift, loyal, but only fragments of their armor ever returned. What carried their fate back to the fortress was not the men themselves, but the wind carrying the faint scent of smoke and the iron tang of battle. The first strike came in the dark hours before dawn. From the west, a column of fire rose against the sky, turning the canopy of the ancient woods red. It was not the work of beasts or accident. It was controlled destruction. One keep burned, its banners torn, its walls reduced to ruin. The lion summoned his captains at once. In the war room, the holomap of Caliban glowed faintly, its surface marked by points of light. "They have struck their first blow," the lion said. His voice was steady, but the weight in it was iron. Captain Orlan leaned over the table, pointing toward the west. This was no raid. This was a purge. The keep was loyal to terror. The lion's gaze shifted to the dark forests. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he gave the order. "Secure the central keeps. No movements without my command. Caliban will not descend into chaos." Even as the orders went out, news arrived of another attack, this time to the north. A patrol of Terran-born Astartes was ambushed in the woods. When reinforcements arrived, they found no enemy, no survivors. Only carved into the trees were old Calibanite symbols, marked deep into the bark. Luther did not come to the council that night. The lion found him instead in the lower courtyard, watching the knights train beneath the pale moonlight. "They have begun," the lion said. Luther's expression was calm, almost distant. "I warned you they were restless." "You warned me," the lion said, "as though you were not at their head." Luther's gaze met his. There was no anger in it, no denial, only something deeper, more dangerous. "I'm at Caliban's heart," he said quietly. "Where else would I be?" The lion left without answering. In the following days, the strikes continued. Small garrisons loyal to terror vanished overnight. Keeps once bound to the First Legion's order now flew only the colors of Caliban. The rebellion was still silent in word, but loud in action. And then, one night, from the highest tower, the lion looked out over the forests and saw it. The fires, not just in the west, but in the east as well. The first strike was no longer a single act. It was a chain reaction, igniting across Caliban. The silent rebellion had found its voice. The rebellion could no longer be denied. From the high walls of Alderuk, the lion watched as the forests below were no longer dark but alive with movement. Columns of armored warriors, banners of green and black, the old sigils of Caliban fluttering in defiance of the Imperium. The keeps loyal to Luther had turned their weapons toward the fortress. The first volleys came not from siege guns, but from the forests themselves, missiles arcing out of the tree line, impacting the outer walls in bursts of fire and stone. The walls of Alderuk trembled, dust falling from the ancient battlements. The lion stood in the grand hall, his captains gathered before him. "The war has come to us," he said, his voice cold, controlled. "Alderuk will stand. The First Legion will not bow." Captain Orlan spoke, his voice tight. "My lord, their numbers grow daily. The outer garrisons are gone. We are surrounded." The lion's gaze swept the room. "Then we hold. Until the Emperor himself calls us to his side, we hold." Preparations began at once. The gates were barred, the battlements reinforced. The forges roared day and night, producing weapons not for the crusade, but for survival. In the lower halls, Terran-born Astartes stood shoulder to shoulder, their armor blackened with soot, their bolters cleaned and loaded. Above, the green banners of the Legion still flew, though each day they were singed by fire. The first true assault came at dusk. From the tree line, a wave of Calibanite warriors surged forward, their armor dark against the fading light. Heavy guns roared from the woods, battering the fortress walls. The defenders answered in kind, bolter fire raking the advancing lines. The clash was brutal. The forests echoed with the sound of gunfire, the screams of the dying, the grinding of steel on stone. On the western wall, the lion himself stood, his blade in hand. Every strike was precise, every movement a storm contained within the form of one man. Those who dared the wall met death in moments, but for every wave repelled, another followed. Inside the fortress, Luther's voice spread, not in person, but in whispers carried by the wind, in messages smuggled by those still loyal to him within the walls. His words promised freedom, sovereignty, a Caliban unshackled from distant terror. The lion could feel it. The siege was not just of stone and steel, but of hearts. The days bled into nights, the nights into days. The fires in the forests never dimmed. Each dawn found the walls still standing. Each dusk brought new assaults. On the seventh night, a section of the outer wall fell. The Calibanites surged forward, only to be driven back by the defenders in a storm of fire. The breach was sealed, but the cost was heavy. The lion stood over the battlements, his armor streaked with ash and blood. Below, the enemy regrouped, their banners rising again in the smoke. The siege of Alderuk had only begun, but already the fortress was bleeding. The siege had dragged on for weeks. The forests around Alderuk were no longer green. The canopy had been scorched by fire. The ground churned into mud and ash. The air hung heavy with smoke, and the fortress itself bore the wounds of unending assault. Walls shattered and hastily rebuilt, gates blackened by flame. Yet still, Alderuk stood. The lion walked its battered halls in silence. His armor was scarred, his cloak torn, but his presence was unchanged, calm, unyielding, like the fortress itself. He knew the enemy outside was not the greatest threat. The greater danger waited within, Luther. For days, messages had reached the lion, sent through hidden channels, unsigned but unmistakable in their intent. They spoke of meeting, of ending the siege without more blood, of speaking as brothers once more. The lion answered none of them, but on the 50th night of the siege, the message came not in writing, but in fire. At the western wall, a lull fell over the battlefield. The Calibanite banners withdrew just far enough to be seen, not as an act of surrender, but as an invitation. The lion understood. In the grand hall, he gave no orders to his captains. He only said, "Hold the walls." Then he turned and walked alone toward the lower chambers, where a single passage led to the ancient keep's heart. He found Luther there, waiting. The years had not changed him outwardly, but there was something different in his bearing, a weight in his stance, a steel in his voice that the lion had not seen before. "You came," Luther said. The lion's voice was quiet. "I had no choice." They stood facing one another, the silence between them deep as the forests they had once hunted together. "You have led these men into rebellion," the lion said at last. "You have turned brother against brother." Luther's eyes burned with something between grief and defiance. "I have given them a cause worth dying for, a cause that is theirs. Can you say the same of the Emperor's endless wars?" "The Emperor's cause is the Imperium," the lion replied, "and ours is to serve it. Serve it." Luther's voice rose, the calm breaking. "We have bled for it. We have given our sons to it. And what has it given us? Nothing but chains. Caliban could have been free. You could have made it free." The lion stepped forward, his presence filling the chamber. "And in your freedom, you have brought only war." The tension between them was a drawn blade. Then, as if the siege outside had been waiting for this moment, the distant thunder of battle rose once more. The fortress shook, dust falling from the ceiling. Neither man moved. "Brother," Luther said quietly, "this ends tonight." "Yes," the lion replied, "it does." Their hands moved, not to clasp, but to draw steel. In the chamber beneath Alderuk, where the banners of the First Legion hung in shadow, the two once brothers raised their blades. The final the chamber beneath Alderuk was silent, but for the sound of steel meeting steel. The lion and Luther moved like two forces of nature, each strike a storm, each parry a thunderclap. The banners of the First Legion swayed in the wind, stirred by their combat, shadows dancing across the ancient stones. Neither spoke. Words had been exhausted long before this moment. Now only action remained. Luther's blade was faster than the lion, remembered, his strength matched by something more than skill, something born of conviction, or perhaps of desperation. The lion met every strike, his own blows precise, controlled, but edged with grief. Outside, the siege of Alderuk raged. The Calibanite banners surged against the walls. The Terran-born defenders held their lines, and the air was filled with fire and ash. Yet those battles seemed distant, as though the true war was contained within this single room. A single strike broke the rhythm. Luther's blade cut deep along the lion's armor, forcing him back a step. "You could have stood with me," Luther said, his voice raw. The lion's reply was steady. "I stand where duty commands." Their blades clashed again, sparks lighting the dark. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch beyond time, the lion struck. His blade found its mark, cutting through Luther's guard and driving him to his knees. Luther looked up, his breath ragged, his expression a mixture of pain and sorrow. "You cannot kill me," he whispered. "I am not your enemy." The lion's hand trembled on the hilt of his sword. For a heartbeat, the weight of their years together, of battles fought, oaths sworn, victories shared, pressed down upon him. And then the world above them broke. A roar greater than any cannon split the air. The walls of Alderuk shook, stone cracking, dust falling like rain. In the forests beyond, something vast and terrible tore through the sky. The heavens themselves seemed to rend apart as the warp reached for Caliban. The planet convulsed. Great fissures opened in the earth, swallowing forests, keeps, and warriors alike. Fire burst from the ground, swallowing whole battalions. The lion felt the fortress shudder beneath his feet. He turned to Luther, but the warp's fury was faster. A blast of raw, unnatural force tore through the chamber, hurling them apart. When the light cleared, the chamber was half in ruin. Luther lay motionless, his body broken but not dead, his eyes closed as if in a dream. The lion stood, battered and bleeding, the sound of the fortress collapsing around him. He looked at his fallen brother for a long moment, and then, with a weight that crushed the heart, he turned away. The warp storm consumed the fortress. Alderuk fell into ruin. Caliban itself tore apart. The land ripped into fragments, much of it lost to the void. When the storm cleared, the world was gone, shattered, broken, its pieces scattered among the stars. The lion was gone as well, his fate unknown. Luther remained, bound deep within the wreckage, his voice silenced for an age. The doom of Caliban was complete. Only the echoes of their brotherhood remained, carried in whispers through the ruins of the First Legion. Enfrontation had begun,